One preseason game, 12 shots, a single make. That's all it took for the internet to explode with opinions about Bronny James. But here's what makes this situation different from your typical rough shooting night. The loudest voice in the room belongs to someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be scrutinized before you even get started. Kwame Brown didn't hold back. After watching Bronny go 1 for 12 against the Suns in the Lakers' preseason opener, the former #1 overall pick fired off a statement that cut deep. "We got high school players better than Bronny," Brown declared on his YouTube channel. "Absolutely got high school players better than Bronny." Now, before we dismiss this as just another hot take from a former player looking for attention, we need to understand why this particular criticism carries weight that others don't. Brown isn't just some retired athlete tossing stones from the sidelines. He's someone who lived through being labeled a bust, someone who felt the pressure of expectations he never asked for, someone who understands what it means when your name becomes a punchline before you've had a fair chance to prove yourself. But here's the twist. Instead of empathy, Brown is delivering the exact kind of judgment he once faced. Let's set the scene. Lakers versus Suns. Preseason basketball where rotations are experimental and everyone's trying to shake off the off-season rust. Bronny stepped onto the court for 24 minutes, and the numbers tell a brutal story. 8 points on 8.3% shooting from the field, 1 three-pointer out of 8 attempts. Most of those shots weren't even close. Short, lacking the legs underneath them that separate summer conditioning from game-ready rhythm. The Lakers got destroyed, losing by 22 points in a game that felt worse than the final score suggested. And Bronny, playing in his second year after being drafted 55th overall, became the focal point of every criticism about nepotism, privilege, and whether he truly belongs on an NBA roster. Brown didn't stop at the high school comparison. He went further, dissecting Bronny's entire basketball journey with surgical precision. Bronny was never the best high school player on his team, he was never the best college player on his team, and he still gets 12 shots in a preseason game where everybody's auditioning. That last part hits differently, because Brown's right about one thing. Preseason is when players fighting for roster spots tend to dominate the ball, hunting for every opportunity to showcase their value. So why was Bronny, a second-year player whose roster spot seems secure, getting that kind of volume? This is where the conversation gets complicated. Bronny finished the night with 8 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists. On paper, that's not catastrophic for a young guard still finding his way, but context matters. Those 12 field goal attempts represent significant opportunities in a game where other players, desperate to make an impression, were sharing the court. Coach J.J. Redick praised Bronny after the game, calling him a totally different player than he was a year ago. The organization continues to express confidence in his development, but there's a gap between organizational support and on-court production that critics like Brown are happy to exploit. The elephant in the room has always been LeBron. When your father is arguably the greatest player in the league, when his influence helped architect your path to the league, every missed shot becomes evidence in a trial about whether you earned your opportunity or inherited it. Fair or not, that's the reality Bronny navigates every time he steps between the lines. Brown made this explicit in his critique. The implication wasn't subtle, that Bronny's role exists because of his last name, not his talent level. And when you're shooting 8% from the field, that argument becomes harder to counter with results. Here's what makes this entire situation fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Kwame Brown built his post-NBA career partly on calling out the same media and critics who labeled him a failure during his playing days. He spent years pushing back against the narrative that he didn't belong, that he wasted his potential, and that being selected first overall by Michael Jordan's Wizards set him up for impossible expectations. So why is he now doing to Bronny exactly what was done to him? Some would call it hypocrisy. Others might argue it's honesty from someone who's been through the machine and recognizes when a player is being set up for failure. Brown sees a young guard getting opportunities that seem disconnected from his current skill level, and he's calling it what he believes it is: preferential treatment that ultimately hurts the player receiving it. There's an argument to be made that Brown is trying to do Bronny a favor in the harshest way possible, that by publicly questioning whether he belongs, Brown is forcing the conversation that everyone whispers about but few will say out loud. Maybe in Brown's mind, this kind of pressure will either break Bronny or forge him into something stronger. But there's another layer here. Brown's platform exists because of controversy. His YouTube channel thrives on takes that generate reactions. Bronny James, son of LeBron, struggling in a preseason game, represents content gold. And while Brown might genuinely believe what he's saying, the timing and delivery suggest he's also aware of exactly how much attention this will generate. As Brown was recording his critique, Bronny faced the media with a level of maturity that contrasted sharply with the noise surrounding him. Asked about his shooting performance, he didn't make excuses or deflect blame. "I felt like they were pretty good shots," Bronny explained. "It wasn't rushed, wasn't forcing anything. I didn't have my legs under me as much as I wanted, so a lot of them were short, but most of them were on line."
That response reveals something important. Bronny understands the game at a level that goes beyond just chucking shots and hoping. He's analyzing his mechanics, recognizing that conditioning affects performance, and remaining confident in his shot selection even when results don't follow. Those are the markers of someone who's coachable, someone who's thinking about the process rather than panicking about outcomes. He also addressed the bigger picture. "I'm trying to make the most of the opportunities given to me during preseason," Bronny said. "Since there might not be as many opportunities during the season, I need to play hard to make chances for myself." Read between those lines. Bronny knows his role isn't guaranteed. He understands that preseason represents his audition for meaningful minutes when games actually count. And rather than shrinking from the pressure, he's leaning into it, even if that means accepting 12 shot attempts in a game where nothing went right. Let's address the claim that high school players are better than Bronny. On pure talent evaluation, is Brown correct? Probably. There are 5-star recruits dominating high school basketball right now who would absolutely cook Bronny in a head-to-head matchup. Players with more size, more athleticism, more refined skills at this moment in time. But that comparison misses the entire point of development. Bronny spent his rookie season primarily in the G League, where he showed flashes of the player he could become. He averaged modest numbers, but demonstrated defensive instincts and basketball IQ that don't always show up in box scores. His 40-point game for South Bay wasn't a fluke, it was evidence that when given space to operate without the microscope, he can produce. The Lakers aren't banking on Bronny being an immediate contributor, they're betting on the possibility that with proper development, he could become a rotational piece who understands team concepts and doesn't make game-losing mistakes. That's the reality of being a 55th overall pick. Nobody expected him to be a star. The question is whether he can become useful. Brown's criticism ignores that development timeline. By demanding immediate NBA-level performance in a preseason game during Bronny's second year, he's applying a standard that doesn't match where Bronny actually is in his career arc. It's like criticizing a college freshman for not being ready for the NFL draft. Strip away the specific names for a moment. This debate represents something larger happening in basketball culture. How much should family connections matter? When does supporting your child's dreams cross into giving them advantages others can't access? And what responsibility do organizations have to merit-based selection versus other considerations? The Lakers selected Bronny knowing exactly what came with that decision. They understood the scrutiny, the accusations of favoritism, the pressure on everyone involved. They made that choice anyway, which suggests they saw something worth developing beyond just making LeBron happy. But that decision also means Bronny will never escape the "he only got here because of his dad" narrative unless he dramatically outperforms expectations. Even solid role-player production might not be enough to silence critics like Brown, who believe the opportunity itself was unearned. So where does this leave Bronny? Another preseason game is coming. More opportunities to shoot, to defend, to prove that one terrible shooting night doesn't define his ceiling. The regular season will determine whether he stays with the Lakers or spends most of his time in the G League continuing to develop. Brown's comments will fade into the background noise of hot takes and social media debates, but the core question remains unanswered. Can Bronny James develop into an NBA player worthy of his roster spot? Or will he become another cautionary tale about nepotism overriding merit? The irony is that Kwame Brown, of all people, should understand that one bad game, one tough start, one wave of criticism doesn't tell the complete story. He lived through having his entire career defined by expectations he never asked for, by a draft position that felt more like a burden than an opportunity. Maybe that's why his criticism cuts so deep, because somewhere in his words is the fear that Bronny is walking the same path he did, just with better PR and a more famous last name. And if that's true, then Brown's harshness might not be cruelty. It might be a warning from someone who knows exactly how this story can end if the kid isn't ready for what's coming. Time will tell if Bronny listens, or if he even needs to.